China has been incredibly important for the American film industry, especially over the past 10 years, because we've seen a massive growth in the overall size of the Chinese box office. The Chinese box office is larger than the next three box offices combined, and it's rapidly coming to be this roughly the size of the American box office. We'll see this year with COVID if actually China overtakes the US box office because US theaters have been closed for so long. The Chinese market is actually slowly opening. But what this means is that these big budget blockbusters that are the centerpiece of a lot of American studio production require access to the Chinese market in order to recuperate their budgets. So it's essential that studios can access the Chinese market for their bottom lines. So what we've seen is a shift in terms of prioritization. Studios are thinking more critically about how they can access the Chinese market and what they need to do, not just with individual films, but across all of their product lines in order to be able to maintain access to China. It's really interesting, and we need to think about benefiting what part of China and what part of the United States. And I think this is where the dynamic starts to change. So it benefits the Chinese film industry to have more foreign films, more US films released in the Chinese market, because it actually uses a lot of the studio capacity, particularly for unique format films, so like 3D or IMAX. There are a lot of them in China, and there are a lot of them that are being released in the US. So this is a big advantage. The other advantage is in terms of this kind of Chinese focus on becoming the biggest and the most powerful in the world. So Hollywood studio films also bolster the overall size of the Chinese market. Historically, they have. Now, this year in 2020, we won't necessarily see that, but things like the Avengers Endgame increased the overall size of the Chinese box office because of the number of box office receipts. Now, this is becoming less and less important as there are really big Chinese blockbusters that are appealing at least to the Chinese market, maybe not to the global market at this point. So things like, Wolf Warrior 2 or Neja are really, The Wandering Earth, are really taking the Chinese box office by storm, even if they're not making a big impact elsewhere. Now, one thing that we do see, though, is that the US is benefiting in terms of its overall market growth. So US studios are benefiting, and the US stock market is benefiting as these studios are able to grow. However, that doesn't necessarily mean that the US creative industries benefit as a whole, because Hollywood studios are now thinking, what does it mean when I make something for our access to the Chinese market, and not just about this particular film, but about anything that our company makes. Well, I think a lot of it will depend on what happens with the COVID box office. So specifically, how quickly US theaters are able to kind of reopen and start to really admit large numbers of people in a very dense way. If that doesn't happen for years, then we may see a Hollywood studio system that starts focusing almost entirely on the Chinese market for any big budget films. The other thing that I think we're seeing is we may have a transformation in terms of where films are made. If the pandemic continues to be really bad in the US, we may see a lot of what's called runaway production or production in other countries. So that could also shift the power dynamic between Hollywood and China. We're definitely seeing an increase in Chinese studios operating within Hollywood and in funding films. This is actually the most significant within the context of tech firms that have moved into production. So, for example, Alibaba Pictures, because these are firms that are cash rich. You don't necessarily make a ton of money from making movies. A lot of the reasons why there are big blockbuster films is because they're ancillary products like toys and lunchboxes and cartoons that are able to complement the film production. So cash-rich tech firms are actually uniquely poised to be able to participate in content production, even if they don't get a financial return immediately. So with the new WeChat ban and concerns about Tencent's operations in the US, we see that this might also kind of impact funding in Hollywood if the administration kind of starts to move further in that direction. So I think that there are actually a lot of opportunities for potential collaboration. And I know that there's been a lot of discussion about, Chinese influence and Chinese soft power and changes in content. And I mean, these are real concerns. However, one of the things that was the foundation of the research for my book, Hollywood Made in China, was something that still exists today. And that's the interest in shared creative collaboration between creative people in the United States and China. And this doesn't necessarily exist on the level of, Avengers Endgame or these gigantic blockbuster films, but there are people who are, screenwriters and independent producers who are still genuinely interested in learning from each other and telling shared stories, or even not telling shared stories, just learning from one another and telling strange idiosyncratic stories that they're able to develop. And that's really exciting. And I think it's really important. And it's very, very easy to overlook with the increases in rhetoric, both in Washington and in Beijing.